I'm repurposing a room in my house for my aquariums. While doing this, I decided to upgrade some equipment, in particular a filtration system. Currently, I have two hang-on-the-back filters on my 55-gallon cichlid tank. I maintain one filter 1 week and then the other filter the next. I wanted to improve the filtration and also cut down on maintenance. After much research, I decided on a SunSun HW402B. While researching, there were 4 recurring questions from users. What type of media do I need and in what container is it placed for maximum efficiency? How do I set up the intake and outtakes? How do I use the UV filter? And how often do I do maintenance? To get the most out of your canister filter, use all 3 types of filtration: mechanical, biological, and chemical. Water from your tank enters the filter through the input line and is sent to the bottom of the canister. From there, it passes through the media and works its back way up to the top and out. As the water enters your canister and goes down to the bottom, you have about a ½ inch of space where the water just swirls around. What I like to do is to take a little gravel and just put it in the bottom. If any debris goes down there, as it swirls around, it'll hit the gravel and break up into smaller bits, giving your filter a little less work to do. We start with the mechanical filtration. In this canister, I have 3 different sponges. A very coarse sponge, a medium grade sponge, and some fine floss. You always want to go from the coarsest media to the finest. Next, we put in the biological media. In this case, bioballs. Actually, the instructions recommend bioballs. When using bioballs in a submerged state, you need to leave a lot of room for them to move around. I usually fill it up about 30%. Make it as a moving bed filter. In my top container, I'm going to place my chemical filtration. In this case, I'm going to use some charcoal. Went out and got some little mesh bags. Tie it up. There's more carbon than I'll need. Doesn't take up a lot of room. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some more biological media. Ceramic rings. I think you can never have enough biological media in your filter, especially when you have cichlids. And you can mix and match. Now let's talk about setting up the intake and the outtake. We have our manifold here, 2 lengths of tubing, the output, and your input plastic parts. The intake comes with 6 pieces. This curved piece hangs over the top of your tank. This piece is where the water is going to be coming in. Now, depending on the size of your tank, we have several extensions that should be long enough for my 55. And what we have here is something that they call a dirtiness entrance. It's some type of a manual skimmer. This piece will go on like this in the water, and this will actually float on the water and will move up and down through water level. The theory being is any floating debris will get sucked up in there into your intake. I generally found that these things really don't work that well, and I'm just going to keep the cap on mine and just use a standard intake. Putting water back into your tank, they have a spray bar. A bar with a bunch of little holes in it. Put it together. It will hang over your glass inside the tank, and the water will be input here and be sprayed out through the width of your tank. There's a barb on the end of this with this, I guess you'd call it a compression nut. You work the hose on, and then you tighten the nut down over it. And you do the same thing on the other end. When you have it all assembled and you're ready to put it into your tank, your canister filter is going to have to be lower than your tank. It's basically a gravity-fed system. And you would also want your intake hose to be your shortest hose. If my tank was going to be here, for example, I would cut the hose and just have a small piece. On your return hose, it really doesn't matter. I generally like to have my intake on one side of the tank and my return on the other. That way I get a nice flow of water through the tank. The UV filter light has a working lifespan of about 10,000 hours. After that, it loses its effectiveness. It can be on 24/7 with no harmful effects to your aquarium. One school of thought even thinks it's beneficial in helping fish fight infection. The drawback to leaving the light on all the time is that it uses electricity and it reduces the life of the bulb. In a well-balanced aquarium, you may need to turn it on only when the tank is cloudy or when you notice algae starting up. Run it for a few hours to a few days to fix the problem. If you run the bulb 24/7, you will need to replace it approximately every year. If you turn it on, let's say, every Sunday for a few hours, it should last about 8 to 9 years. I have a friend who runs his every weekend for about 24 hours, and he has some of the cleanest tanks you'll ever want to see. How you use the UV filter is up to you. You may need to experiment a bit to find out what is best for your particular tank. Several factors determine your maintenance schedule: tank size, filter size, the size of your bioload. The bioload is how much livestock you have in your tank. About 2 years ago, I made a DIY canister filter. It was a small filter and I used it in a 40-gallon tank of cichlids. I ended up maintaining it every 2 weeks. I have a friend who uses a canister about the same size as this in his 30-gallon aquarium. He has just a few community fish, angels, swords, molly. He cleans his filter about twice a year. I'm going to use this canister rated for 75 gallons on a 55-gallon cichlid tank. I'm hoping to reduce my cleaning the filter down to every 2 to 3 months rather than clean the filter every week as I have before. To figure out my maintenance schedule, I check the flow every couple of days. If I notice a decrease in the water flow, then I know it's time to clean the filter. I also open up the canister after a month and check the mechanical filter pads. If they're fairly clean, I seal it back up and check back next month. If they're mucky, then I know it's time to clean. After a few months, I've determined how long I can go between cleanings, and that time period should stay constant as long as there is no significant change in the bioload of the tank. I set up this 40-gallon tank in my office while I finish making over what will be my fish room. The filter is on the floor and is lower than the tank, and you can see the intake and outtake on the filter and how it all works. We talked about how to set up the media in your filter. Make sure the intake water flows through the most coarse material first, and that the water flows through the mechanical media, then through the biological media. This puts the cleanest water back in your tank. And we talked about how to use the UV light. I don't recommend leaving it on 24/7, but I believe in some situations that can be useful. You need to find out how it works best for your tank. And lastly, we talked about maintenance. Keep a close eye on your filtration system for the first few weeks. This should help establish a maintenance schedule for your tank. I hope we've helped with your questions you may have had on setting up the SunSun Canister filter. For more information on aquarium filters, see our series, DIY Filters, and thanks for watching.